It wasn't just about David and Alicia. It was about realizing how much had been missing between himself and Sarah. As the night deepened, the air grew heavy with unspoken tension. The laughter softened, the silences lengthened. Every glance carried more meaning than it should have. When Alicia refilled Michael's glass, her fingers brushed his. The touch was brief, but deliberate. Sarah noticed her breath catching, but, strangely, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like something inevitable, something they had already agreed to simply by showing up. Later, David leaned closer to Sarah during a story, his voice low, his smile gentle. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, a forgotten flutter she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about lust. It was about being awakened. Michael noticed how Sarah's eyes lit up around David. And though part of him ached, another part realized something. Sarah deserved that light. And maybe he did too by the end of the night. No lines had been fully crossed. But everything had changed. As they prepared to leave, Alicia looked at them both, her eyes steady and knowing. "I'm glad you came tonight." Sometimes the heart just needs to be reminded of what it's capable of feeling. The words lingered, long after they left the house. In the car, silence wrapped around Michael and Sarah. Neither of them could deny what had happened. The shift was undeniable. Sarah finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Michael, did it feel different for you tonight?" Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to deny it, to push it away. But the truth was sitting heavy in his chest. Yes, he admitted, it did. And in that moment, both of them knew they had crossed an invisible line, not through actions, but through emotions. Curiosity had turned into something deeper, something more dangerous. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she couldn't stop replaying the way David's eyes had held hers. Michael, lying beside her, couldn't shake the memory of Alicia's touch. It wasn't just about desire. It was about being seen, being heard, being alive again. And though they hadn't spoken it aloud, both knew one thing with certainty. There was no going back. The weeks that followed their second evening together felt like stepping into a new, uncharted world for Michael and Sarah. Life on the outside still looked the same house, the same routines, the same polite smiles when neighbors waved from across the street. But inside their hearts, something had shifted. David and Alicia were no longer just acquaintances. They had become a presence, a pull neither Michael nor Sarah could ignore. Messages were exchanged, sometimes lighthearted, sometimes deep. Invitations followed, and soon evenings together became a quiet pattern. Dinners, walks, late night, conversations that stretched until they lost track of time. What had begun as curiosity now grew into something layered, something dangerous. Sarah felt it first. With David, she rediscovered parts of herself she thought had long been buried. He asked questions Michael hadn't asked in years. What makes you happiest? When was the last time you felt truly free? What do you dream of that no one knows? She found herself opening up to him in ways that surprised her. She told him about her passion for painting, how she once dreamed of opening a small studio filled with colors and light. David listened as though her words mattered deeply, as though her dreams weren't childish or forgotten. His eyes held her with an intensity that made her chest ache, and when he smiled at her soft, understanding, Sarah felt seen again, truly seen. Michael noticed the difference. He saw the way Sarah's face glowed after evenings with David and Alicia, how her laughter rang brighter, freer. At first it hurt like he was losing her to someone else. But then, strangely, he realized he was feeling something similar himself, because Alicia had become his mirror. Alicia was unlike anyone Michael had known. She carried a strength that wasn't loud but undeniable, a quiet grace that demanded respect. With her, Michael found himself speaking about things he rarely voiced, not about finances or daily chores, but about fears. He admitted how sometimes, even in his marriage, he felt invisible. How he worried that life had passed him by while he was busy chasing stability. Alicia didn't judge. She listened, nodded, and when she spoke, her words carried weight. You're not invisible, Michael. You've just forgotten how to see yourself. You've been giving, but not receiving, and love needs both. Those words pierced him. He realized how much he had buried his own desires, how much of himself he had locked away. With Alicia, he didn't feel like a provider or a husband bound by routine. He felt like a man again alive, vulnerable, wanted. It wasn't about intimacy in the physical sense, not yet. It was about emotions, every shared glance, every laugh. Every moment of being truly heard blurred the lines of what was acceptable. They weren't just friends. They weren't just couples experimenting with curiosity. Something deeper was binding them together, web of emotions they hadn't planned but couldn't escape. One evening, they gathered again at David and Alicia's house. Dinner was casual, the mood light. But as the night wore on, unspoken emotions grew heavier. Sarah excused herself to step outside, needing air. The night was warm, the porch light casting a soft glow around her. She leaned against the railing, her thoughts tangled. She didn't notice David had followed until she heard his footsteps. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. Sarah turned, startled, but when her eyes met his, something inside her stilled. He wasn't just asking about the evening, he was asking about her. "All of her? I don't know," she whispered, her throat tightening. David stepped closer, his gaze steady, searching. "Are you happy, Sarah?" The question hit harder than she expected. She wanted to say yes, to protect her marriage, to protect herself. But the truth pressed against her chest like a weight. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "I thought I was," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But now, not sure anymore." David's face softened, his hand almost lifting as if to touch her. But he stopped himself. Restraint in his gesture was both comforting and heartbreaking inside. Michael sat with Alicia. Their conversation had drifted from light topics to something raw. "Do you ever feel afraid?" Michael asked suddenly. Alicia tilted her head, curious. "Afraid of what?" "Of losing someone you love, 'cause you love them too much." For a moment, her eyes grew distant. "Every day," she said softly. "Loving deeply is terrifying. It means giving someone the power to break you. But the alternative, living without that love, is worse." Michael swallowed hard. Those words echoed in him. He thought about Sarah, how he had loved her once with everything in him. Had he stopped? Or had he simply forgotten how? That night ended like the others, with polite goodbyes and lingering looks. But as Michael and Sarah drove home, the silence between them was louder than ever. Sarah's mind replayed David's question, "Are you happy?" Michael's heart echoed with Alicia's confession. Loving deeply is terrifying, but living without, it is worse. They didn't speak. But each knew the other was lost in thoughts they couldn't admit. In the following days, the confusion only grew. Sarah caught herself thinking about David when she should have been grading papers. Michael found himself replaying Alicia's smile when he sat through long meetings. It wasn't obsession, it was longing. It's a quiet pull toward something that felt both wrong and right. At home, their marriage began to feel like a fragile glass balanced on the edge of a table. Every word, every silence threatened to tip it over. And yet, strangely, they also found themselves closer in some ways. For the first time in years, they talked not about bills or groceries, but about feelings. It was as if David and Alicia had awakened something inside them both. But the awakening came with danger, because love once stirred doesn't obey rules. It doesn't fit neatly into the boundaries of marriage vows or social expectations. It grows where it's watered. And both Sarah and Michael had unknowingly been watering feelings outside their marriage. The four of them were no longer just couples experimenting with curiosity. They were hearts entangled in a delicate, dangerous dance, and deep inside, each of them knew someone would eventually get hurt. That night, As Sarah lay in bed beside Michael, she closed her eyes and tried to silence her thoughts. But she couldn't forget the way David's eyes had searched hers under the porch light, and Michael, staring at the ceiling, couldn't erase the sound of Alicia's voice saying, "Love needs both." They were falling into something deeper, something they hadn't planned. And the question now wasn't whether they had crossed the lane night, it was how far they were willing to go. Michael and Sarah had been married for 8 years, and on the surface they looked like the perfect couple. Their house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Atlanta, with neatly trimmed lawns and neighbors who waved politely when passing by. They had stable jobs. Michael worked in finance, Sarah in teaching, and their lives were built on steady routines. Every morning started with coffee together in the kitchen. Every evening ended with television on the couch. To outsiders, they were admired. Friends often told them how lucky they were to have each other, how strong their marriage seemed. But behind their smiles and polite laughter, a quiet ache grew between them. The spark, the one that once made their hearts race and their eyes linger on each other, had grown faint. They weren't unhappy, but they weren't fully alive in their love either. It was as if they had become companions more than lovers. Two people walking side by side but not holding hands. Sarah felt it the most during the evenings. She would glance at Michael while he scrolled through his phone, the glow of the screen lighting his face. She remembered when those same evenings used to be filled with whispered dreams, playful touches, and stolen kisses in the kitchen. Now, silence filled the space. She missed being seen. Michael, on the other hand, carried his own restlessness. Work consumed his days, and by the time he returned home, exhaustion replaced affection. But deep inside, he longed for the days when Sarah's laughter echoed like music, when her eyes lit up just at the sight of him. He loved her, of course, but he couldn't deny the distance that had crept in. It was during one of those quiet weeks that they received an invitation to a dinner party. A friend of Sarah's colleague had moved into the neighborhood and wanted to gather people together. Michael agreed without much thought. Perhaps a night out would do them some good. That Saturday evening, dressed neatly but without much expectation, Michael and Sarah walked into a warm, lively home. Music played softly. In the background, glasses clinked and laughter floated in the air. The atmosphere was welcoming, filled with the hum of new friendships waiting to be formed. And that was the night they met David and Alicia. David was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength that drew attention without him asking for it. His smile was warm but reserved, the kind that carried depth. Alicia, by contrast, radiated light. She had an energy that made people lean closer, a confidence softened by grace. Together, they were magnetic. From the moment introductions were made, conversation flowed easily. Michael and Sarah found themselves seated with David and Alicia, sharing stories that stretched beyond polite small talk. They spoke about travel, how David and Alicia had once taken a spontaneous trip to Paris just because they needed to breathe. They spoke about dreams. Sarah confessed she once wanted to open a small art studio, something she had buried under responsibilities. Michael admitted he sometimes wondered what life would be like if he had pursued writing instead of finance. What struck Michael the most was the way David looked at Alicia. It wasn't just admiration, it was devotion. His gaze lingered, as if no one else existed in the room but her. And Alicia returned that look with equal tenderness, her laughter softening, her hand brushing his arm naturally, like she couldn't help but reach for him. Sarah noticed too. Her chest tightened with something unspoken, a longing. She remembered when Michael used to look at her that way. She remembered when her smile alone was enough to light up his world. Watching David and Alicia was like being reminded of something she had lost but deeply craved again. Hours passed without them noticing. They shared food, exchanged jokes, and spoke about the different ways love changes over time. At one point, Sarah admitted, "Marriage is beautiful, but sometimes feels like it turns into routine more than romance." Alicia smiled knowingly, her eyes locking with Sarah's. That's because we stopped feeding it. Love is alive. It needs air. It needs risk. It needs passion. Sometimes the best way to find the spark again is to step outside of what you know. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the laughter in the room. For a moment, silence fell around their table. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his heart suddenly pounding faster. Sarah swallowed hard, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. They all knew what Alicia meant. It wasn't said directly. It didn't need to be. The air was thick with unspoken suggestion, and the weight of it pressed on Michael and Sarah in ways they hadn't expected. The rest of the evening carried on, but something had shifted. Their conversations took on a new edge, every glance holding a hidden layer. Michael noticed the way Sarah laughed at David's jokes, her eyes sparkling in a way he hadn't seen in years. Sarah noticed the way Alicia listened to Michael, leaning in as though his words truly mattered. By the time they said their goodbyes, Michael's mind was racing. Sarah's heart was unsettled. They drove home in silence, the sound of the engine filling the space between them. Finally, Sarah whispered, almost afraid of her own voice. "Did you hear what she said?" Ka gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Yeah, I heard." They didn't speak further, but the thought lingered in the air like smoke, dangerous, intoxicating, impossible to ignore. That night, lying in bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the image of David's steady eyes, the warmth of his smile. Michael, beside her, stared into the dark. Remembering the way Alicia's words cut straight into him, they had always lived safely within the lines of what marriage was supposed to be. But now curiosity had been awakened. And curiosity, once stirred, is a force that can't easily be silenced. The spark they thought was gone had returned, but not in the way they expected. And deep down, they both knew this was only the beginning. The days after that dinner party felt different. For Michael and Sarah, something invisible had shifted between them, not only as a couple, but also within themselves. The words Alicia had spoken lingered in their minds like a haunting melody. Sometimes the best way to find the spark again is to step outside of what you know. Sarah carried those words with her to work, to bed, to the quiet moments when she stood in the kitchen staring at her reflection in the microwave door. What did it mean for her? Was Alicia simply speaking about adventure? Or had she meant exactly what it sounded like, that sometimes you needed to explore beyond your own marriage to truly find what was missing? Michael wrestled with it in silence too. During his morning commute, he found himself remembering Alicia's calm, knowing gaze, the way her words held a certain conviction. She didn't seem like the kind of woman who threw ideas carelessly into the air. No, she had meant them. And that thought gnawed at him. At night, when Sarah lay beside him, the silence between them grew heavier. They had always been able to read each other without words, and now each felt the other carrying the same unspoken question. But neither dared to speak it out loud then. A week later, the message came. Sarah was the first to see it. Her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize at first, but when she opened it, her heart skipped. It was Alicia. The message was warm, friendly, but underneath it was an unmistakable invitation. "We really enjoyed our time with you. Both. We'd love to meet again, just the four of us. Maybe dinner at our place this time?" Sarah read it twice, her pulse quickening. She waited until Michael came home from work, then showed him the message. He read it silently, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah whispered, "What do you think?" Michael exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing through his hair. "I don't know, but I can't deny I've been thinking about them too." It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no, but it was enough. That Saturday, they drove to David and Alicia's home. Sarah felt as though she were stepping into a story she didn't know the ending to. She had dressed with more care than usual, choosing a dress that made her feel confident. Michael, too, had taken time with his appearance, and Sarah noticed. The tension between them wasn't born of anger, it was anticipation. When David opened the door, His smile was warm, grounding. Alicia appeared behind him, glowing with the kind of beauty that came not only from looks, but from the way she carried herself. They welcomed Michael and Sarah in, and soon the evening unfolded with ease. The four of them gathered around the table, sharing food, wine, and laughter. The conversation started lightly about work, about travel, about the small annoyances of everyday life. But as the hours passed, the walls of formality began to crumble. Michael found himself talking to Alicia in a way he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. She asked questions that weren't just polite, but thoughtful. She wanted to know what he dreamed of beyond his job, what he wanted for his life. And as he spoke, he realized he had buried many of those dreams so deep that even Sarah no longer knew them. Sarah, meanwhile, was drawn into conversation with David. He had a way of listening that made her feel seen, his attention steady and unwavering. When she spoke, he didn't glance at his phone or interrupt. He leaned in, his eyes locked on hers, as if her words truly mattered. At one point, Sarah really laughed, the way she used to when she and Michael first dated. And Michael heard it. His chest tightened, because it had been so long since. That sound had come so freely from her lips. But instead of jealousy, what he felt was something else. Longing.